Shalom, this is TV7's Israel at War update, and today we mark day 609 since the Islamist Hamas perpetrated its atrocities on October 7th of 2023. And with that, we do have a lot of developments. We will focus today particularly on the Gaza Strip, Lebanon, and to a lesser degree also on the Islamic Republic of Iran, which remains the most serious threat to the state of Israel. Let's, without further ado, introduce our guest for today, to include Mr. Amir Oren, who is TV7's editor-at-large, Colonel Miri Eisen, formerly an advisor of the Prime Minister's office and a senior officer at the IDF Intelligence Directorate, and last but certainly not least, Colonel in Reserve Reuven Ben Shalom, who is a cross-cultural strategist and a senior fellow at the ICT at Reichman University. It's great to see all three of you. Mr. Owen, let's start by focusing on the Gaza Strip.
Right. So in the Gaza Strip, fighting goes on. The Israeli Defense Forces have gone back to several sectors they have already occupied and then withdrew from for tactical and operational reasons. And fighting is taking a heavy toll. Earlier this week, there were several casualties among the Israeli troops, and hopefully this number will not rise, but of course war has its pace and its price. In addition to the fighting, the major issue in Gaza is the distribution of humanitarian aid. And today, there is apparently a pause. First of all, the IDF and the humanitarian agencies have announced that aid will be distributed only between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. But later, it turned out that there will be some other pause, and the Gazans have been advised to stay away from the distribution centers for the time being. Apparently, Hamas is trying to take over and control distribution. There are, you may call them militias, gangs, hamulas of anti-Hamas armed people in Gaza, about 300 according to the latest count, who are fighting Hamas for control. This is quite an issue now, even in the Israeli public discourse, with some critics of the government saying that these people are as worse as Hamas, as bad as Hamas, because they have had Daesh connection.
Indeed, you're referring, of course, to one of those clans, or rather a tribal leader, Yasser Abu Shabab Tarabin, from the Tarabin tribe, which, of course, is a very large tribe. It constitutes roughly 500,000 people across the Middle East, with chief focus on Sinai and Egypt, where they originate from. Nevertheless, during the course of history, from Mamluk days through the Ottomans and the days after, one of the ways to control the clans in the Levant was to integrate them into tribes. So this tribe was, of course, one of the major recipients to many of the local clans at the time, Arab clans at that migrated here from various locations, from the areas, of course, of Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and other places over the years. But nonetheless, the point that you referred to about those who oppose the government, of course, we're talking about a leak that was made by Member of Parliament Avigdor Lieberman, who provided details from the subcommittee on intelligence of the Foreign and Defense Committee that was discussing classified information in a very small setting. I'm surprised since he himself is not a member of that subcommittee. Nevertheless, he managed to gain that information and spread it out because naturally it was done for political reasons. But when we're looking at the details, here specifically Yasser Abu Shabab, who was indeed affiliated to Wilayat Sina in the Sinai Peninsula, the Islamic State component in Egypt, formerly known as Ansar Beit al-Maqdis, during its days affiliated to the Muslim Brotherhood. He was actually a logistics operative, namely a smuggler, moving munitions and other types of things between the Sinai Peninsula and Gaza before October 7th. But nonetheless, Colonel Eisen, as a senior officer in the IDF Intelligence Directorate, what are we to take out of this, and to what degree is this common practice to utilize clans that, of course, are aligned in their animosity towards a specific group, despite their affiliations, sometimes due to their own blood affiliation to tribes or clans, to more extreme organizations? In this case, of course, they are fighting for control of certain areas, and in the future, they might once again turn their guns not only against Israel, but against the West.
The fact that we're trying to look for somebody who's going to be pro-Israel is immediately our challenge. Nobody within the Gaza Strip is going to be for Israel. At the best, they'll be for the Palestinians there and hopefully against all of the different groups that call for our annihilation. We've always had different clans, both inside the Gaza Strip and different families and tribes and clans in the West Bank throughout the Middle East. That's not something new, as you were talking about before, Jonathan. The question here at the heart of the matter is what will be in that term that we all hate the day after in the Gaza Strip. We say very clearly not Hamas. If it's not Hamas, the choices are not pro-Israel factions inside the Gaza Strip. It's going to be the locals, the clans, the tribes. Some of them are going to be affiliated to things even worse than Hamas. And in this case, as I say, who are they rooting for? The Islamic State does not exist in the same way that it did in the past in Sinai under Egypt. It still certainly exists in other areas. I have to look at it one day at a time. At the end, we don't want to be, or at least I hope, that Israel will not be the direct ruler over the Gaza Strip. And that means that somebody else has to do the work there. And that work there needs to be the Palestinians themselves. And as I said, the choice is not between Zionists. It's going to be between very challenging figures inside the Gaza Strip. And I stated in a very clear way, I don't want anybody to think that inside the Gaza Strip, there are actually clans that support Israel. At the best, they don't see annihilating Israel as their main focus.
Just to reinforce what you said back in 2004, when there was a lot of discussions about still the Oslo Accords and a two-state solution and so on and so forth, the legislative elections that were pushed forward by Condoleezza Rice at the time ultimately brought about the resounding victory of Hamas with 75 seats in the Legislative Council, in contrast to the Fatah faction of Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, which only won 45 seats. And the one person who was on a ticket for peace, namely a two-state solution and such, was no other than the technocratic prime minister of the Palestinian Authority, Salam Fayyad, who only secured 2.41%. So that just gives you an indication to the degree of aspirations to reach some type of two-state solution. Therefore, I always refer to it as an internationally aspired two-state solution rather than a locally aspired one. But I did my homework, and it seems like there is here not much of Israeli involvement other than granting freedom of operation plus coordination on humanitarian issues in specific neighborhoods which are occupied by those anti-Hamas militias. The ones actually dictating the discourse happen to be the Palestinian Authority, with Colonel Baha Baalusha, the person holding the Hamas portfolio in the Palestinian General Intelligence Directorate in Ramallah, a person who actually originates from Gaza and in 2006 fought against Hamas, and three of his own children were murdered by Hamas at the time. He is the point man dealing with this issue alongside the senior Sharia law advisor to Mahmoud Abbas, namely Qadi Mahmoud Habash, who also formerly served as a member of Hamas and subsequently left them after he said that the atrocities they committed against Fatah in Gaza were un-Islamic in essence, and therefore he changed his allegiances to the Fatah faction in this context. They are the ones who are coordinating everything on the ground beyond the bounds of what Israel is allowing to happen. So there is no direct link from an Israeli perspective other than granting what we call in Israel gvulot gizra, so to speak. But nonetheless, Colonel Ben Shalom, I'd like to hear your take on that, since the complexities remain when we're talking about fighting Hamas deeply embedded in the Palestinian population in the Gaza Strip, and at the same time also utilizing all kind of heinous tactics against IDF troops.
This is true. I think the problem here is that we can't really debate this seriously. And you did your homework. Not many people can do homework as thorough as you did. And one of the ways that this government has been waging the war is not sharing a lot of the vision for the day after, or some will say there is no day after, but even if they have a vision, it's not shared. So certainly we don't have the details. And here you can see that we know about this because of a leak. First, I'll say that in a normal organization, things should not be leaked. That means if something is done in secret, because the government and the IDF and ISA all believe that the mission will be better served if it's kept under wraps, it's not a good idea to come out and leak it, because that will sabotage what's going on. So what we find ourselves is finding out something, bits and pieces, and then it's very political. So if you'll have a debate now in the opposition in Israel, like General Yair Golan or someone will come out and explain why this is a horrible idea. What does that mean? It means nothing, because he's the opposition, and he'll always say that everything the government does is a horrible idea. Another point I wanted to make is that history shows us that this is a mistake. And careful, I'm not against it. This is more a teaser. But in hindsight, if you look back at what the Americans always did, to go in somewhere, to try to intervene, to overthrow, to dictate who is going to rule, to take a certain faction, to arm them, ultimately, it didn't really work out very well. But what does this teach us? It teaches us the situations are complex. And if you do something now, it doesn't mean what's going to happen in 5 or 10 years. All this doesn't mean that we shouldn't be doing this right now, because tactically on the ground, to get the mission done, for instance, to get the aid done now, perhaps that's the right thing. It doesn't mean that the Israeli government means that this specific tribe is the designated ruler in the Gaza Strip the day after.
I agree and disagree, because historically it works.
As always.
Absolutely, but nonetheless, well, not as always, because I tend to agree with you on a lot of things, Reuven. But here specifically, and I'll explain why, because historically speaking, many of those proxies and various militias or sub or transnational minorities that have been backed by state actors are usually successful in their goals when it is kept away from the public's eye. And therefore, in certain spheres of influence, we see across history that those various small groups, resistance groups, or other types of proxies are being very successful in degrading the capabilities of an adversary, be it the Arab legions that were utilized by the British during the pre-mandate World War I, or the resistance in Europe in World War II, which was instrumental against the German Nazi Germany during that time, and also in different capacities in the region. Right now, sub-state actors are being utilized far away from the public sphere, and they're being very successful, in contrast to what people tend to believe. But of course, the public cases are usually the ones that failed. Mr. Oren, one of those public scenarios that failed was Lebanon, of course, and therefore let's move to that country right now, where just a couple of days ago, on the 3rd of this month, we saw Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi travel there meeting with both the leader of Hezbollah, Naim Qassem, as well as the head of the parliament, Speaker Nabil Berri, and the president and prime minister who oppose him vehemently. But nonetheless, he claims now that relations are great and that Iran sees its influence grow in Lebanon, yada, yada, yada. 2 days later, a devastating strike on Hezbollah's 127 unit, which is an aerial unit for drones. What can you tell us about all of that?
Well, just to precede it by several remarks and trying to link it to your earlier discussion, the Israeli experience in Lebanon in 1982 had to do, of course, with the secret connection between the Israeli Mossad and defense forces with the Lebanese forces, the Phalange, under Bashir Gemayel, but even more importantly, after the assassination of Bashir, the massacre that the Lebanese forces have undertaken in the Sabra and Shatila camps. And the point is that Israel did not bear any direct responsibility for it, but it suffered because of its connection with the forces, the local forces, which had the blood feud with other local forces. And the clans in Gaza, if they undertake such a massacre, even against a behest of Israel, if they, for some reason, massacre other people in Gaza, Israel, of course, would be blamed, regardless of whether it could control it, if it had any influence over Abu Shabab and his troops. And as you mentioned, the atrocities of Hamas in 2007, when they pushed Fatah people out of high rises, were in a way a premonition of what they did against Israel 16 years later. This is obviously in the nature of what happens in Arab versus Arab conflicts. So Israel should be aware, and it could find itself under the microscope if things get out of hand. Now, regarding Lebanon at the present, the Iranian concern is that its proxies, such as Hezbollah, especially Hezbollah, will look at what is happening in the American-Iranian negotiations as an Iranian willingness to sacrifice those proxies. Once the American demand that the talks go beyond the nuclear file into the other two domains of the ballistic missiles and of the proxies, Iran could find itself under a lot of pressure, because it does want an agreement, to sacrifice those parts of the so-called Ring of Fire. And therefore, Hezbollah needed reassurances. Apparently, they got some verbal ones. And what we saw in the Dahya, the Israeli Air Force strikes against Unit 127, workshops where drones and other tools of war have been prepared to strike Israel. This is perhaps an attempt by Iran and its proxy to try and rehabilitate what Hezbollah lost last fall and winter. But at the same time, the current Lebanese leadership, headed by President Joseph Aoun, the former army commander, they have protested the Israeli strikes, but deep down, they know that this is good for their own authority.
I can't agree more with your latter point. I think that President Joseph Aoun and the Lebanese armed forces are doing a great job in many of the areas. There are just some areas, including the Dahya, where it will be very hard for them to bring about the necessary change, and therefore Israel can take the liberties in order to enforce what the Lebanese armed forces cannot, and that is very important. I will mention one point about Sabra and Shatila, and that is something that is always a matter of broadening the picture. It came after a separate massacre that was perpetrated by the people of Sabra and Shatila and the PLO in particular, or Fatah, against a number of Christian villages that brought about the calls for revenge, and I do not agree with the consequences of those revenge or the actions of revenge, but nonetheless, we do need to always remind that there are two sides to each story, and it didn't just emerge out of nowhere. I'm sure that any person whose entire family was massacred will want to act in a very proactive way against his enemies, and this is, of course, the consequences thereof were quite atrocious. But nonetheless, Colonel Eisen, I'd like to hear your take on the Iranian angle. And if, unless you want to point something about Lebanon, we don't have very much time left, but I would like to touch on the response by Abbas Araghchi, the foreign minister of Iran, to the latest nuclear negotiations. And he said as follows: "Why do you think they, meaning the Americans, are negotiating with us?" And then he answers his own question, saying because they were disappointed that their cruel sanctions would not bring the Iranian people and the Iranian government to their knees. If they were sure that they could bring us to our knees, they would not negotiate. They would have told themselves that we would wait and in a few months they would surrender and move forward, but they saw that this would not happen because of the strength of the Iranian people. He goes on to highlight that they will not agree to zero enrichment once again. What should we take out of that?
That would be the campaign speech that he made before he runs as president for the Islamic regime of Iran. I'm actually going to disagree a bit with some of the things that Amir said before when it comes to this visit in Hezbollah in Lebanon, and connect it also to the Iranian nuclear issue. I think that the Iranian nuclear issue, I think that they're coming to Lebanon right now. I want to remind us, first he went to Egypt, and from Egypt he came to Beirut in that Iranian plane. I'm going to ask Jonathan, what was on that plane that came with him into Lebanon? Because I'll remind everybody that the Lebanese stopped Iranian planes from flying into Lebanon at all, and suddenly a plane came via Egypt, but it came into Lebanon. That what the Iranians do still want to do, that Islamic regime, is absolutely rebuild Hezbollah's strength. I think that they're coming there to back Hezbollah, to show that they're still there, to have that open door, both for the Quds force, for the different forces of the Islamic regime, to rebuild it. And they want to do that and have the nuclear weapons. And as the foreign minister came on and in, give the campaign pitch for why they're better and stronger than the Americans. This is a lot of rhetoric. I'm worried about the action. I'm worried about an Iranian plane that lands there. And I, in that sense, say the fact that we are continuously targeting and hitting the different targets that we are very clearly, Hezbollah, that when we tell them to leave, they all leave. Nobody's dying there. We're only destroying weapons. And what we're doing right now, as we did in Syria from the end of December 2024, is yes, we're protecting Israel, we're defending Israel, but I really feel that we are showing what needs to be done against terror armies in the region. It is, to me, I don't want to say textbook because nobody's written it yet, but that's how I look at the Iranian visit, that they came, they may have brought things, and what we do is we continue to attack that odd sort of coordination with the Lebanese army because it benefits all of the Middle East, and I will say the world, that Iran is weaker, that they can't supply weapons, and that Hezbollah does not hold these impossible type weapons, not in the heart of Beirut and not in southern Lebanon or in the Bekaa Valley.
Well, we see the Iranian rial plunging further and further, while they claim that it's not affecting the Iranian people. The Iranian people are, of course, in a very dire situation. And my heart goes out to them, since the Iranian people are noble people. Only a very small percentage of this country is actually supportive of the current regime, and that is also something we need to take into account. Colonel Ben Shalom, not very much time left, but nonetheless, what Miri just mentioned is very valid. You were involved, I keep it in public knowledge, you were involved in the 2002 Karin A affair, where Israel intercepted a large vessel carrying thousands of munitions, if I may say it mildly. This is not the first nor the last time, and the Iranians are indeed using all tools at their disposal to ramp up the capacity of their proxies, including in Yemen, including in Lebanon, including elsewhere.
We're in a generation that doesn't remember the Karine, so people should look that up. But what I learned there, boarding this Iranian ship and seeing the magnitude, the capacity of what they did, the effort they put into arming back then, it was the Yasser Arafat and his gang. It just showed me that the Iranians are determined. They have a mission. We sometimes can argue about what we think the day after will be. They know what their day after is. No Israel. They will not rest. They will continue. And going out to Lebanon, or their rhetoric that they're using towards us, towards the American, it all serves that goal. And by the way, for every organization, certainly a country, it's very effective to have a goal and always strive to reach that. We just have to understand that's their goal and continue to promote our goal, which is stability, peace, security. And I'm happy you said that about the Iranian people and the Lebanese people as well. All we mean is to live in peace and quiet near our good neighbors.
We're very hopeful for peace with Lebanon and all of our neighbors at that, but of course within the bounds of viable conditions. I will point out just one more data point, and that is that reports have indicated that China has delivered thousands of dual-use components for the assembly of ballistic missiles, amounting to roughly 800 ballistic missiles to the Islamic Republic of Iran, diverting some of those components also to Yemen through various both land and sea corridors in an attempt to smuggle them to this Iranian proxy there. So it means that they are also working tirelessly to ramp up their own proxies, or so-called vessel states, at this state of dire fluidity in the region, in light of the fact that we are indeed in the age of strategic power competition. And with that, I'd like to immediately thank Colonel Ben Shalom, Colonel Eisen, and Mr. Oren for all of your valuable insights. And I'd like to thank all of you at home as well, and wish you a Shabbat Shalom. But nonetheless, we still have a program later this evening, so stay tuned. Until then, Shalom.